I am so delighted to introduce you to Erica Ruth Neubauer and James Benn, who are here tonight to talk about Erica's new book, Murder at Wedgefield Manor, and all things writing mystery, murder mystery, all of that good stuff. So a little bit about our authors this evening. Erica Ruth Neubauer spent 11 years in the military, 2 years as a cop, and 1 year as a high school English teacher before she found her way as a writer. She has reviewed mysteries and crime fiction for several years at publications such as Publishers Weekly, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and Mystery Scene magazine. She's a member of both the Mystery Writers of America as well as Sisters in Crime. And when she's not writing her next novel or curled up with a book, she enjoys traveling, yoga, and craft beer. She lives in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So big welcome to Erica, who will be popping up on screen here in a matter of moments. And joining Erica tonight to talk about all of these wonderful things is James Benn, who is the author of the Billy Boyle World War II Mysteries. The debut, Billy Boyle, was a Dilys Award nominee and a BookSense Top 5 mystery. A Blind Goddess was longlisted for the Impact Dublin Literary Award. The Rest is Silence was a Barry Award nominee, and The Devouring was a Macavity Award nominee. Benn, a former librarian, splits his time between the Gulf Coast of Florida and Connecticut with his wife, Deborah Mandel. Welcome, James. And some of you may remember that during the pandemic, we hosted both Erica for Murder at the Mina House. So when this came out last year, she was already on a virtual book tour. So she's just been doing this whole thing. And we also hosted James for the Red Horse. So if you're ever interested in watching those events, they are on our YouTube channel, which you can check out via our website. So without further ado, I'm going to let Erica and James talk for about 25 or so minutes, and then they're going to call me back up on screen and we'll take your audience questions. Take it away.
Oh, thanks very much, Anastasia. It's great to be back in Mystic, sort of. And speaking of being places virtually, Erica, this is your second book and you haven't actually been out on the road yet.
I have not.
So what was it like being geared up for the release of your debut novel and then having this pandemic hit and the lockdown? Just what was that like, and how did you kind of scramble to deal with it?
Frankly, it was, I mean, it was a blow. I had a huge launch party planned with like, 100 people coming, and a tour that I was going to, come out to Mystic. I was going to be in Arizona. I think there were some others, Houston. I had a book tour planned.
All the biggies.
All the biggies, and yep, just shut down. So the best I can say is I've been in my local independent store to sign books, but other than that, I have never done a single thing in person. And like everybody, I just had to roll with it. Right.
And you probably had to become adept at Zoom before many of us, because this happened right on the cusp of your release, right?
It came out, my book came out about 2 weeks after we shut down.
Wow.
So I very quickly got used to Zoom.
Now, I don't know, for people who haven't read Erica's books yet, Murder at Manor House, at the Manor House came out last year. And one of the things that I was just immediately attracted to were the names. I mean, I'm big in working on protagonist names. And I was struck by Jane Wunderly. So Wunderly just it's evocative of wonder, of Mandalay, of all these associations, and Redvers, whatever he is. So how did you come up with those names, and what approach do you take in naming characters?
So Jane, I've always really loved the name Jane for whatever reason. Maybe, Jane Eyre. I don't know, a lot of Janes, Jane Austen, I like Jane. I think it's a simple but strong name. And Wunderly, I actually had watched The Maltese Falcon with my father not too long before I started writing. And one of the names that Mary Astor's character gives is Miss Wunderly. And so that last name definitely stuck in my brain. So when I sat down, I was like, oh, Jane Wunderly would be a great name. And Redvers, I came up with, I was literally looking through like listings of what names were popular in England in the 1920s. And I can't remember if that was a last name or a first name, but I came across it and was like, I really like this. Yeah. And what if I use it kind of like Cher, or that's the only name that he wants to go by.
Right.
So that's kind of how do you go about coming up with names?
I noticed a while ago, I have a lot of names that start with B because I go to an alphabetical listing of French names, and I'm smart enough to go, don't have them be all A's, but then I go through the B's and I found a great name. So I often at the end of the book have to go back and find names that start with other letters. But it's the same thing. It's a name that hits you as having a meaning, either a meaning that will disguise the character, so you give them a nice friendly name and they're really the bad guy, or vice versa. If you want to make a red herring, you give a really nasty name. In one of my early books, the only time I did the opposite, the character was Luc Ballard, and he was a villain. And I thought, well, we're just going to find out right away. So
nice.
Sometimes it's just fun to match the names to the character or use the name as a disguise. But I end up on all sorts of websites, just like you were talking about. You just start running down lists of names.
It's interesting to me that both of us seem to feel that like a name immediately has a feeling associated with it, regardless of, you just read it and you're like, it's either it fits or it evokes a feeling. I think that's interesting.
Yeah. And sometimes if I have just a dead body with a name, it'll be somebody I know, because it's kind of fun to.
I've started doing that too. There's a couple people I know that their names have appeared in this book for sure, and the next book for sure.
I had a corpse named Stuart Neville once. That was a lot.
Perfect.
So you had a blog post in Crime Reads recently about books set in the 1920s. And you made an interesting observation that the Roaring 20s came after the pandemic of 1919. And then I think you said that you're pretty sure that we'll have our own Roaring 20s after this one. So two things. One, I want to guarantee. And second, what is our Roaring 20s going to look like in the 2020s? What are we going to do? Jitterbug?
Listen, I will learn to jitterbug.
Okay.
I think there's going to be a lot of partying, like kind of like, and I think it's starting already, unfortunately, before it should be. I mean, if you look at like the spring breakers, I'm like, you guys, it's not time yet. It's not time yet to be doing that. But I think that's kind of what it's going to look like, kind of like it did in the 20s. I think people really associate with the 20s with coming right after the war, but it also came right after that pandemic. It's interesting. It's been like almost exactly 100 years later. Now we're having another pandemic in the 20s. So.
Right. Okay. So where is our next book going to take us? You've got a character who goes all over the world. Do you have a hint of where she's going to go next?
So this one is set in an English manor house, number 2. Number 3, which is turned in, is set on a transatlantic cruise. And then number 4, I am sort of doing research for right now, and I'm thinking maybe Greece. Mostly places that like I would not mind taking a research trip to.
Now, did you find during the lockdown that you had not only time, but the ability to concentrate on writing and research? Or how did that work for you?
I actually found that I had all the time in the world and none of the concentration. I really struggled to write. I did not write a Jane book during this lockdown.
Okay.
That was already done. So I think I took it out and did some polishing or revisions, but it had already been drafted. I was really lucky. And so I had been working on a standalone, and it was like pulling teeth to just get any words on the page. And I'm hoping now that things are, there's some light at the end of the tunnel. I'm hoping that we'll start to feel better. How about you? Have you been able to write during this?
Yeah, in the first part, from last March until this fall, I was able to be prolific. It was an escape. I really loved going to the 1940s and the pleasantries of World War II compared with the pandemic and politics today. So I really escaped into it and even had time to write a couple of short stories.
Oh, nice.
So, which I had never done before. So, yeah. Lately, though, it's waning a little bit. It's like, okay, I've had that time. I'm ready for normal life, whatever that will be. But I have to admit, it was a wonderful escape. And it helped that we passed that time down here in Florida, and sunshine and a lot of outdoor activities to take our minds off. So that really did help.
Fair.
So we talked a little before about ideas and where they come from. And you asked me about ideas for the Billy Boyle books, because the next one coming out is number 16. And I have to say that, well, the next book, Road of Bones, is set in the Soviet Union, and it's all thanks to Reed Fail Coleman. For those of you listening, if you don't know Reed Fail Coleman as an author, you're missing out on a lot of great writing. And he's a nice guy too. And he was at Sleuthfest, the Florida Writers Conference, a few years ago. And he sort of dared me to send Billy Boyle to Russia. And I thought it was a ridiculous idea. And I said, how would I do that? They all speak Russian. You know, it just boggled me. But then, of course, the idea got stuck in my head, and I had to figure out a way to do it. So next year's book is Road of Bones, that's set in the Soviet Union and features the Night Witches, which is the Russian women pilots. They had an exclusive female regiment of fighters and bombers that were all women, the mechanics, the officers, the pilots, and Billy gets tangled up with them. So I'm just laying it out right here. If it works, it's all due to my writing. If it doesn't work, it's Reed's terrible idea.
Reed's fault.
I said it here. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I'm really excited to read about the Night Witches. I'm really excited that that's what you're focusing on.
Yeah, there's a great graphic novel by Garth Ennis called The Night Witches, and his drawings just really like brought them alive for me. So that was a big help.
Yeah. There was a book I read, the Kate Quinn, The Huntress.
Yes. Yep.
That also, I think she did a really good job describing, and like really got into it with the Night Witches. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was good. So it's fun to go to these foreign lands in your head, but you mentioned places you might like to go. So do you have any post-pandemic travel plans to the Greek islands or anything?
I think my first place I want to go is actually Costa Rica, which is not useful for my books, but I just would like to be on a beach somewhere for a little bit once I can. And after that, I think, the Greek Isles sounds like a place that I have been there before, but would love to go back and set something there. And if not there, maybe France. That's another place that I would like to travel to.
Oh, I could see Jane in France in a heartbeat.
Oh, right? Yeah.
Oh, she has to.
Yeah.
So what's your, this may be a question that people ask later, but what's your writing style in terms of plotting? This is the traditional pantser versus plotter. So where do you fall in that continuum?
I am a pantser 100%.
Oh, okay.
I would love to be a plotter. I think it seems really neat to know where you're going with things. Like my first book, I didn't even know who did it until I was like 2/3 of the way done writing it. I was like, oh, I think it's this person. Yeah, I am a pantser. So
you know, I'm reading Murder at Westfield Manor, and I'm about maybe 60% done. I have no idea who did it. It's just, I keep thinking it could be this, it could be that, but I don't know. I keep looking for the least likely person, but you keep changing the least likely person. So that's the advantage. I think a plotter, you almost give it away, but a pantser, you don't know what you're doing. So how could the reader figure it out?
It's true.
Uh,
Are you a pantser? Are you a pantser?
yes, I once tried to plot out a book, and I got these, you know, those poster board post-it notes, the big sheets of poster paper that have them, and I used the hero's journey as a template, and I plotted out everything I wanted to have happen, and I put them all up in my office. It was like wallpapered with these things. I sat down to write. I never once looked at them. And when I was done, it was a completely different plot, but it still followed the hero's journey. So I figured, okay, it's,
good enough.
Yeah. So when I said the word Wedgefield, I remembered that it's named for a golf club.
Yeah.
So what's with the golf and you? What led you to put golf into? And maybe that's, I don't know if it's a spoiler because I haven't finished this one yet. But,
oh, it's not. I honestly think golf is really boring, to be perfectly honest with you. The reason I put it in the first book was because it was one of those weird factoids that I ran across that I could not help but put in. It was that the Mina house had a golf course. And I was like, they're in the middle of the desert. Why, how, and why do they have a golf course? So I made Lillian really big into golfing because I really wanted to talk about that. So then I ended up with this golfer that I don't care about golf.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe you were just out there on the link saying, we have to have a golfing.
Nope. I'm more like Jane, where she's like, I don't get it, but like, okay.
Yeah. And I have to mention her Aunt Millie, who is really a hot ticket. I mean, she's got an attitude, but I really like her, and more about her is coming out in this book as we go on. So she must be fun to write.
She is. She's a piece of work. She is based on my grandmother.
Oh, really?
Who is deceased. So I can say that now.
I don't want to say good, but
right. Yeah. My grandmother was really quite a pot stirrer. Mm-hmm. Really like to stir the pot with people. So.
All right. So I assume Aunt Millie will stay with us in these stories.
Yes, I will say, unfortunately, she's not in book 3
at all.
She has like a cameo at the beginning, and then she's not in it, but she will be back. She will be back for book 4.
Okay. All right. So what's the most surprising thing you found out on this kind of warped journey as an author, that you're locked down, but you're still going through you're still doing appearances and selling books and getting starred reviews. So what surprised you in all this?
That's a really good question. And I would say that what surprised me is how supportive everybody has been, but that's not true because the mystery community is amazing. So of course everyone's been very supportive. I guess I think maybe it's how surreal it feels still. Like I have walked into a bookstore and seen my book on the shelf and it still doesn't quite seem real.
Yeah. They must have just put it there as a courtesy to you.
Right? Or that like, did somebody else write that? I'm hoping like maybe book 3 that'll start to set in. So
good luck with that.
What have you found anything surprising about this journey as an author? Because you were a librarian before, right?
Right. I think I never conceived of a writing community. I just thought I would be writing, and if I was lucky, a book would get published. And as you mentioned, the crime fiction community is really a tight, supportive group for the most part. And I just never even thought about that. I don't want to say I was surprised. It just seemed normal that once I started meeting people, they were great. And everybody is trying to help everybody else. And the attitude is kind of a rising tide lifts all boats. So that's been wonderful. I think the surprising thing is, how similar a lot of people's process is during writing. I hear so many people talk about this manuscript is horrible. I'm finally going to be found out as a fraud, and you know, I think all those insecurities are pretty commonplace, and they come and go depending on where you are in the writing process. And every time I hear somebody talk about that, I go, oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's surprising how neurotic we all are about that.
It's true.
So.
I remember actually hearing Sue Grafton say that, and like she had been hugely influential to me. Like I picked up her books when I was in high school, and for me, reading somebody who, like, you know, a very strong female protagonist who was PI, was just really so influential. And so hearing her talk about, like, she also had imposter syndrome. She wasn't sure she could ever do it again, and I was like, Sue Grafton doesn't know if she can do it again. And honestly, that was my impetus to be like, well, you can sit down and give it a try at least.
Yeah. So what other writers do you enjoy reading? Maybe even non-mystery, or what are your reading habits outside of what you read for research?
I actually really love to do research. Is one of the reasons I like writing historicals. I love to like dive into and learn a bunch of stuff. I'm really nerdy that way. So for this one, I read a bunch of stuff about like Britain in the 1920s and like social issues, and it's one of the reasons I decided to pick up it's veteran centric. And Mina House, I did the same thing. I like got a bunch of books about, you know, Egypt, and I found some out of print books about the actual Mina House.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So, because it's a real hotel. And so the transatlantic cruise, same. I bought a bunch of books about. My method is really to just buy a bunch of books and read them.
Yeah.
Whenever I want to know something, there's going to be a book about that.
Yeah.
But for reading for pleasure, I still read mostly mysteries and crime fiction. It's really what I love to read. One of my favorite ones that I've read recently was Fortune Favors the Dead. I think it's by Stephen Spotswood. It is set in the 40s and has two female protagonists that are partners that are, it has a kind of a Nero Wolfe vibe to it with women. It's fantastic. I really enjoy it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to ask you about some of the flapper jargon you put in. And I'm trying to remember, there was one about a butterfly's boots or something. So yeah, how did that go?
You're the butterfly's boots.
Yeah. So was that real, or did you make that up?
No, it's real. Yeah. I found a bunch of, and Susie Calkins, her series, she does even a better job with the flapper slang. But yeah, I found some resources of fun terms that they used, and picked my favorites. They really added just the right touch to them. Yeah. Fair.
Okay, I don't know when Anastasia is going to want to reappear.
Here I am. Hello. Yeah. Oh my goodness, it's so much fun to get to listen to you guys both, you know, accomplished mystery writers talk about sort of your craft and all of the little details. And the audience has put a bunch of questions into the chat, which is so great. And before we dive into those, I just want to say to our audience, please submit your questions in the chat. We'll get to those. I can't wait to talk a little bit more about these things. So keep chatting in. All right, so first up, I want to call attention to Tom Watson's question, because you guys talked a little bit about side characters. We talked about how Millie isn't really going to be in book 3 of the Jane Wunderly. So I think this is a great question to start off with. How do you come up with such fabulous supporting characters? And specifically about the walk-ons that are often only in one scene, but are so well written, they stick with us forever. And I think Tom was referencing some characters from the Billy Boyle series, but I think this question really applies to both of you. So Erica, if you want to go first, and then Jim, you can go next.
I just try to honestly think about all of them as real people. And so like really think about a real person would have whatever quirks, whatever, you know, things that make them them, whatever things that make them interesting and unique. I really try to come at each person that way, even if they are just a walk-on character. How about you, Jim?
You know, I'll answer the thing about the walk-ons first. For me, if I have a character who may just appear in a chapter or have a very small part, I look at it like writing a short story, that I want to bring this character on to help move the plot forward, but that he or she comes with their own identity, and it's going to be shaped by the forces that are at work within the narrative. But they're a real, like you're saying, they're a real person. They're not just there for the purpose of advancing the plot. So I look at and I love that. That's the most fun I have in writing a book, is to be able to tinker with these characters and make them real and have them exist outside the story, in my mind at least. And then the secondary characters that are in each book, they're really there to reflect off the main character, Billy Boyle. So they're there to be different. And also in writing from the first person, you have to, I have to have characters that can go do things, that can go off, because we're always seeing the action through the eyes of one character. So it's very helpful to have them. And then when they're there, they have to have their own, they have to do double duty. They have to have their own identity, but they also have to compare and contrast with the main character. Otherwise, it would be pretty boring. And a few books back, I finally had them get into a big tiff with each other. Because I thought, wait a minute, these guys have been together for, you know, a dozen books now, and they like each other. You can't spend that much time with anybody and let still not have a. So they had a big, almost a breakup, and that was fun to explore, because that was something new with the characters.
Nice.
That was awesome. Thank you guys so much. So Laura asked a great follow-up question to that. Truly, how do you keep track of all of these characters in your book? You know, for Jim, you have 15, 16 books now. I lost count when we were talking about this earlier, but you have so many characters. And for Erica, you know, for you, there are a whole cast of characters in Murder at Wedgefield Manor, from Martha in the Kitchen to Lillian and her cousins, whose names are escaping me right now. Yes, Poppy. But especially when you're plotting who is going to be our culprit, how do you keep track of all of that? So Erica, I'll let you go first again, and Jim, you'll follow up with that.
I think for this one, I did know who it was going to be. So I didn't have as hard a time keeping track of who was doing what. More for me, it was more of making sure everybody looked suspicious at some point or another, which was how I go about it. And it would be a great idea for me to start keeping track of the characters and who I'm using. I should probably start doing that.
You should start plotting things out.
Right. Right.
For me, it's when I'm writing, I like to keep it all in my head, and it's very helpful to be able to write every day, and to. I'm looking at the side because we're about to have a guest appearance by my cat.
Ooh.
This is Hamo. Hamo occasionally writes, but it's BBBZFQRT. He never makes it to the final edit. Bye-bye. So, what was the question? Give me back.
Keeping track of all those characters.
So it helps to be writing every day to keep them all in my head. And it's sort of like juggling, you know, you can't let the balls drop. You know, the book I'm working on now for 2022, I'm about at 60% done, and I just killed the guy I thought did it. So we're going to have to revisit that. But there's always enough characters in the mix that somebody can be found to serve as the culprit.
So this brings me to a question that I had. You guys talked about whether or not you were a plotter or not, or if you were a linear story writer. Could you talk a little bit about what a pantser is? Because that word is not familiar to me, and I'd love to hear a little more about that writing methodology.
It's writing by the seat of your pants.
Oh, okay. See, and this is the thing, is because I had spelled it out in my head like cancer, pantser, not pants as in pants on my body. And I was over here very perplexed about what this.
No, for me, it's Panzer, Panzer. I just go forward like a tank.
Just keep going.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a little different for everyone.
Yeah.
You can all have your own different definition for not writing in a plot line.
Right. And I think most people have a theme that they want to write about, and the plot just comes out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so continuing on this vein of writing, Laura asked, when do you get most of your writing work done? Are you a morning writer, an evening writer? And I'd love to hear a little bit more about what your actual physical routine is. Do you drink tea while you write? Do you, walk and write? And I want to hear more about that.
So I share with my protagonist, Jane, her deep and abiding love of coffee. So I am probably like 60% coffee at this point in the pandemic. So I get up in the morning, I have my breakfast, I make a giant pot of coffee, and then I go sit in the room behind me, or I'll go to a coffee shop and write. I'm a morning writer, even though I'm not a morning person, which I find very interesting, to be honest. But if I don't get it done in the morning, I probably won't get it done for that day. So I sit down for the first couple of hours of the day and bang away at the keyboard with a lot of coffee.
Yeah. I'm a slow person in the morning. I have a lot of time with coffee and with the morning news, and I try to keep up with email and social media, and generally waste my time the entire morning. And then there's lunch, and then there's a nap, of course. And then there's the 2 o'clock panic. I haven't done anything yet. And then I tend to get a lot of work done in the late afternoon into the early evening. And sometimes I actually do start writing in the morning, but I probably get more done in the last 2 hours of the writing day than in the whole day before that. And if I don't have an interruption, I like to do at least 1,000 words a day, or maybe more, maybe less.
That's amazing. Awesome. So let's keep sort of on this writing bent, but let's shift a little bit to the research. And before we talk about that, Laura is wondering, Erica, is the Mina House still a hotel in Egypt? Can you tell us a little bit more about the Mina House? I know we weren't there this book, but.
Yeah, but it is still a hotel in Egypt. Unfortunately, it's not owned by the Marriott. But it is directly next to the pyramids. I stayed there, and it was amazing. Like, you're eating dinner and like you're just looking out the window and like, wow, there's the pyramids. I will say the most surreal thing that happened while I stayed there was there was a wedding in the courtyard below my room, and like you could see the pyramids, and the wedding played Walk Like an Egyptian really loud, and I was like, is this real? What's happening here? Yeah, so it's a gorgeous hotel. It's obviously been updated, but there are still a lot of the same original elements there. It was originally built as a hunting lodge for the royal family, and then was purchased in the early 1900s and then made into a hotel.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And then just a follow-up as we talk about research, Barbara is asking who the author was about 2 women who had a Nero Wolfe vibe.
Yes,
And then James, for you, what was the Reed Farrell Coleman title you mentioned? So I'll give you both a second to, Jim, if you already have your answer while Erica's looking hers up.
Well, he was challenging me to write a book set in the Soviet Union, which is the 4th is Road of Bones coming out in the fall.
Gotcha. So pre-order Road of Bones. The link is in the chat, and I'll drop it in one more time before we end. And Erica, did you recall this?
It's Fortune Favors the Dead, and it's by Stephen Spotswood, Spotswood.
Awesome. So did you get the opportunity to visit England like you did Egypt when you were doing Murder at Wedgefield?
I did not, but I've been to England several times. So I didn't, I wanted to go back, but it just timing wise didn't work out. but I, you know, like I said, I've been there several times. So.
Yeah, totally. So back to our writerly questions, and I have to shout out our audience. I love that they're asking all of these awesome writerly questions, and this is going to be a good one. And I'm also just going to do a quick little shout out. We have Juliet Grames, another great local author, in the audience with us tonight, so she can confirm or refute any answers that you guys give to this next question. But Laura's asking, is there a big difference in the number of pages or in the writing of your first draft and your final draft? Tell us about the process from the end to on the shelves. What's that like for you?
Well, for me, I try to take my time writing, and I'm not somebody who takes out or adds a lot to the final draft. I go over it and try to finesse the presentation. But no, it doesn't really change that much in terms of word count. And often writers will talk about words because pages come later. When you're writing, it depends on the font and all that. But we talk about words. So I'm really like at 60,000 words for the book I'm working on now. And when I'm done at about 100,000 words, it'll stay there. So some will come out, some will come in, but I'm more of a fine tuner along the way. I read tweets by writers say, I cut 10,000 words today. It's like, oh my God, how could you write 10,000 words and then cut them? That's crazy.
I write not like that at all.
Thank you, Juliet.
I write a very short first draft. My first draft is usually around 65,000 words. And it's almost all action and dialogue. And it's again kind of like the Panzer, actually. Just keep going, get to the end of it. And then I tend to actually set it aside for a month or two, and then I come back to it with fresh eyes, and I go through and I layer in other things. So I layer in detail of where they are and description of the clothes, what they're doing, and I'll layer in more character, just more character. And I layer that in, and that brings me up to my word count, which is usually around 80,000.
Yeah, totally. So I know Murder at Wedgefield was not written during the pandemic, but it sounds like maybe you did a little bit of research for upcoming books during this time. Is that?
I have done.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I did some research, and actually I wrote, like I said, I wrote a standalone that might never see the light of day with my pandemic book. But I did do some research about artifacts and sunken treasure.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. And Jim, how about you for your 2022 book? How has your pandemic research gone?
Well, this one is set in southern France, and it involves the resistance, but also the Nisei 442nd Regimental Combat Team, which is one of the most decorated units in the Army, and they were Japanese Americans whose families were all in detention camps. So that's been some fascinating research. But I'm just going to be really quick about this. I just stumbled across the fact, and once again, a lot of research reward comes from finding a footnote. And I found a footnote in another book that talked about J.D. Salinger's war record. And all of a sudden, I started reading everything I could. And J.D. Salinger was a sergeant in the Army in World War II. He hit the beach at D-Day on June 6th. He fought all the way to southern Germany. He liberated a concentration camp. He worked as a counterintelligence officer hunting Nazi war criminals. And you don't know this about Salinger, Sergeant Salinger, because I'm sure nobody remembers, but the last two lines of Catcher in the Rye are, never say anything about anybody, because then you start missing everybody. And there's all sorts of stuff on the web about what that means. But what it means is he's talking about the dead. He's talking about his buddies. He's talking about the dead in the concentration camps. And now everything I read of his, I'm seeing through a whole different light. And by God, Sergeant Jerome Salinger is going to be in a book. There's no way he's staying out of one. one of these books.
I
So
love
you never
that.
know where it's going to come from.
Yeah, that's incredible. And, you know, that's always a really fun question to ask. And you've already answered it for us here. But I always love to sort of ask people who write, whether it's nonfiction or anything that's based in reality, is what's the most surprising thing that you found while researching your book? And I think you might take the prize on that one.
Yeah. Finding something like that is like finding a piece of gold in a stream.
Yeah.
Like you see this gleam and you know it's gold, and you just have to keep mining it.
Right. And it stokes the creative fire for sure.
Yeah.
So I have run through all of our audience's questions for the evening. If you guys have anything else you want to sort of touch upon and discuss, we can absolutely do that. Otherwise, I'd love to end on Erica reading a little bit from, oh, maybe not. Can I put you on the spot like that?
I'm going to admit that I don't have a copy of the book handy.
Okay, well then we will not have to do that, and everyone will just have to go out and, or not go out rather, you can just go right to our website, which I'm going to drop the links into the chat one more time, and get your own copy of Murder at Wedgefield Manor. And if you really want to be looped in on all of the characters and what's happening, and our heroine, Jane Wunderly, and her coffee love and her sassy Aunt Millie, you can also pick up a copy of Murder at the Mina House. And I have some book plates from Erica, which will come with your books. And a very special thank you to James Benn for joining us tonight. It's always so fun to get some mystery writers together and hear them talk about their craft, and you two are so fabulous and wonderful, and it was really great to have you. So you can grab a copy of The Red Horse, which is the most recent in the Billy Boyle series. We also have copies of older books in the series if you want to go back, or you can point forward and pre-order a copy of Road of Phones, which comes out in September. And I just want to call attention to Juliet's comment in the chat. She says that her 2-year-old has been watching, and he says he wants to meet you in person. So maybe for book 3, we'll see you here in Mystic in person. And hopefully we will all be through this by then. So I just want to say thank you to our audience, and thank you to both of you. This has been so much fun.
You're standing instead for all the booksellers out there. Thank you for what you've done and all your colleagues have done to keep the books flowing and the conversation flowing, because it could have all broken down. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's a team effort from the bookseller side and with all of our wonderful authors that we get to work with. So we are equally grateful for you and for our audience, because none of this would be possible if you all didn't register for events, jump on Zoom, join us while you're cooking dinner, going for a walk, turning off the TV and listening to some people talk about books instead. So we're so grateful that you take some time out of your busy schedules and lives to come on here and be with us for that. So thank you so much to everyone here on this Zoom and globally tonight. And so I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening and Easter weekend, and we'll see you at the next virtual event.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a great night.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.